What's good, YouTube? My name is Coach, and in today's video, I have built this Mirri the Cursed commander deck for a friend named Melanie, and Melanie has never played Magic the Gathering before. So the purpose of today's video is to teach Melanie and other people that have never played Magic before how to play Magic through this commander deck right here. So in the format known as Commander, every player is required to have a card known as your commander. A commander is a creature that is specifically a legendary creature. Mirri the Cursed here. I know Melanie has a cat, so that's why I thought this was perfect for Melanie on a side note. Mirri the Cursed is a mono color, so there's only one color. Because when we look over here in the top right corner, we see two that's grayed out, colorless, and then two black. So the identity of all the cards inside this deck are generally black and potentially colorless, like the artifacts that we have over here. Every card inside your 100 card deck has to match the identity of your commander. So you would not be able to play a blue card in a mono black commander. Mirri is a vampire cat that has flying, first strike, and haste. Now, it also says that when Mirri the Cursed deals combat damage to a creature, you put a +1/+1 counter on Mirri the Cursed. A +1/+1 counter essentially adds to Mirri's power and toughness. These numbers in the bottom right corner means that Mirri is going to deal 3 damage and can take 3 damage before she has to go to the graveyard. Now, our commander sits in an imaginary place called the command zone. You see over here on the top right corner of the screen. Now, the command zone is essentially an extra part of our hand. So when we play the game, when we start, we draw 7 cards. So we have our deck over here off to the side. We start and we draw 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We take a look at our hand. We have 7 cards here. Now, Melanie, when you're looking to play this commander deck, there are a couple things we have to notice in our opening hand over here. We have cards over here, 3 cards over here called swamps. We have these 2 cards over here, and then these 2. So I think this opening hand perfectly captures what this deck is going to do and why, Melanie, you're going to have a good chance of winning a lot of games when you first start playing. Just so people are aware, the deck list for this is in the description below. So in Magic, like we were talking about earlier with the 2 and then the 2 black mana color symbols over here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 mana we need to pay in order to cast this card and play this card from our command zone. Remembering that command zone essentially means that this card exists outside of the game and essentially acts like another card inside of our hand at all times. Now, in order to get the mana, quote unquote, to play this card, we need something called a land. These are lands. We're allowed to play, or everyone is allowed to play 1 land every single turn. And only 1 land every single turn, unless you have a card that lets you play more. The idea is, when you play the game, this land creates something called mana that we use to cast our spells. So, how do I tell my opponent that I'm using this for mana? In the game of Magic, there's a term called tapping. When I tap or turn my card horizontally from it being vertical, when I turn it horizontal, I'm essentially creating mana. And we'll use this quarter here to represent mana. So right now, if it's untapped, I have no mana. If I tap it, I've just created single mana. Specifically a black mana, because this is a swamp. If I had another swamp and I was to tap this swamp, well then I would just basically create another mana. Now, right now, because I have 2 tapped lands, and I've created 2 mana, I can only cast a spell that costs 2 mana. So we have this Yarok's Fenlurker here that we drew in our opening hand. This is black and black. In order for me to cast this card, I'm going to use 1, 2, and then I'm allowed to play this card. And now this has been spent for my turn. During my next turn, when it goes back to me, everybody at the beginning of their first turn or of their next turn gets to untap their lands, which means that I can tap this, to create mana all over again, so that I could play more. Or I can play another land to generate essentially another mana. Right? So that's generally how the game works and how the cards work. Now what we're going to do is we're going to play test this, and now that you know how we're casting cards, I think that's just a big, something kind of important that you need to know when you're playing the game. So we're going to act like we're playing the commander deck, and while we're playing, we're going to draw for turn. So during your turn, we always draw a card, and we drew into a copy of Murder, which says destroy target creature, which is going to be kind of important in a moment. So the idea with this Mirri deck, in Commander, there's a rule known as commander damage. So when you hit someone for 21 points of commander damage, they automatically lose the game. In Commander, every person has 40 life points. When your life points go to 0, you lose. Or in terms of commander damage, if you accrue 21 points of commander damage, like I said before, you lose the game as well. So the purpose of this deck is to deal commander damage to win the game. Mirri, if we take a look over here, has flying, first strike, and haste. Generally in Magic, when you play a creature, I have to wait 1 turn before I'm allowed to attack with my creature. Mirri is strong because Mirri has an ability called haste, which essentially allows Mirri to enter the battlefield and attack immediately. So, allowing you to accrue those 21 points of commander damage much faster than other creatures generally. Mirri also has flying. So if you notice over here, if we took a look at the Yarok's Fenlurker, the Fenlurker is a creature, it's a horror, that doesn't have flying. So what's essentially happening here is when you're playing the game, and if these 2 creatures were opposing each other, Mirri's doing this, and this is down here. Which means that when you attack with Mirri, this creature cannot block Mirri. Mirri's flying. Now, if this Fenlurker had flying, it would be doing this. Which means that if it attacked, it would be able to block. Right? It would be able to stop you from dealing damage. So, because of that, there are a couple things we need to be aware of when we're playing this deck, Melanie. We need to be aware of that we need to attack. Mirri is our win condition. Attacking with Mirri is how we're going to win the game. Right? So if our opponent has creatures that have flying, it's not good for us. Because we need to be able to attack and deal damage to our opponents to take them out of the game as quickly as possible. So we play cards like Murder in order to get rid of our opponent's creatures that have flying. So, keeping that in mind, these cards can also be used against our own commander. And if Mirri dies multiple times, every time your commander dies, Melanie, your commander costs 2 more to play. So right now, the first time I played Mirri, she's going to cost 1, 2, 3, 4. If Mirri has a Murder cast against her, and she has to go back to the command zone, which is generally where the card would go because that's where she originally was. The next time I go play her, I have to pay 2 more mana. So now I have to pay 6 to play her again. to hopefully attack on that same turn. If another card like Murder is cast, Mirri goes back to the command zone. Have to pay 8. And if it happens again, 10, 12, and so on and so forth. And I'm telling you, that is the easiest way to lose a game, is to play Mirri knowing that there's a really good opportunity for your opponent to cast removal on Mirri, and then Mirri just costs too much mana. Mirri can't come back into the game, and that's just it. But because of that, we're gonna play in a way that's going to allow us to be free from that experience. So we drew our first card per turn, which is this Murder. We always play 1 land every single turn, so we're gonna get our 1 land into play. Now, we have a card here called Duress. This is a sorcery. Melanie, sorceries mean that you can only cast this spell during your own turn. If you noticed over here with the Murder, it says instant, which essentially means I can play this card on my opponent's turn. So technically, I can tap my mana whenever I want. And if I tapped this on my opponent's turn, I would then generate the mana that we were talking about earlier so that I can use this to cast a spell that I'm allowed to play on my opponent's turn. Now, in this situation, because we have this card here called Duress, we're going to go ahead and we're going to play this. Duress says target opponent reveals his or her hand, which essentially means your opponent has to do this, and they have to show you their entire hand. Now, once you have that information, you'll know how many lands they have, you'll know what the creatures that they have in their hand, and you'll know, more importantly, if they have removal like this inside their hand. Because what do we know about our commander? We need Mirri to stay in the game. And if our opponent has cards like this to remove our commander, then we're probably going to lose the game. So, in imagination, we're going to tap this, we're going to create that 1 mana, we're going to spend this mana to cast our Duress on turn 1. Which means we're going to look at our opponent's hand, and then we're going to force them to discard a card from their hand. Which is kind of mean, but it's also kind of good. So, we're going to do that. Let's say our opponent had a card like this inside their hand. Something that could have destroyed Mirri. We force them to discard that card, and then we pass the turn. Then we go to our next turn, we'll untap, we'll draw into another swamp over here, which means that I can play another land. And you're going to notice a pattern here, because during the next turn, we're going to tap 2 mana, we're going to get our Yarok's Fenlurker into play. Now, the Fenlurker says when he enters the battlefield, each opponent exiles a card from their hand. So we're going to play this, and now we force them to discard 1 card on the first turn. Now they have to choose a card that they're going to discard from their hand, or more specifically exile from their hand. Which essentially is going to mean that they're down 2 cards from their opening hand, which is really good for us. So we play this, they exile a card from their hand, then we're just going to pass the turn here. And then when it comes back to our turn, we'll untap, and then we will draw to a card called Blood Price, which essentially can let us draw 2 cards. We'll put that into our hand, we'll get down the swamp, because you play 1 swamp every single turn. And now we have these cards over here called artifacts. More specifically, these are equipments. So these equipments give our creatures a power buff. So if you notice here, it says equipped creature gets +2/+0. This one says +1/+0 for each artifact you control. Which essentially means that if we do just some simple math here, Mirri deals 3 damage like we talked about earlier. Because of this, this is going to allow Mirri to deal 2 more damage. So this is technically 5 damage. With this in play, this would be another 2 damage if both of these artifacts are in play. And we want to get to 21 points of damage as quickly as possible. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to play our Cranial Plating. And then we're just going to pass the turn there. Now, let's say our opponent plays a creature that has flying. And creatures that have flying can block Mirri. And we don't want that to happen. So, we're going to go back to our turn. We'll draw into a Demon's Due. Get down the swamp. And let's say because they played that creature, we could do a couple things here. We could use all of our mana to draw a card. Draw 2 cards with either of these spells. This one being an instant, so we can cast it on our opponent's turn. Or we can get down the Marauder's Axe to potentially buff Mirri when she enters the battlefield. I want to draw here. In this situation, Melanie, I don't have a swamp in my hand to play next turn, and we always want to make sure that we're playing a land every single turn. So we're going to get prepared to do that. So I'm going to pay 4, we're going to cast the Blood Price, and I'm going to look at the top 4 cards in my library. 2, 3, 4. And I can put 2 of them to my hand and the rest in the bottom of my library. So what I'm gonna do is take Swamp, and I'm going to grab the... I think I just want to take the Swamp here as well, just so we're guaranteed to hit our land drops. Those go in the bottom of my library, and then I'll just pass a turn there. So we still have a creature in play to block if we need to block to protect our life total. And then we will untap, and then we'll draw for turn. Armory of Iroas. So I think what we do here is get our land onto the battlefield. Now, we have enough mana to play the Marauder's Axe, so I'm going to pay 2. We're just going to get this onto the battlefield. And then, let's say the next turn after this one, we want to attack with Mirri. So, what we can do here is just... How about... This is going to be interesting. So how about we pass a turn, and our opponent's turn we'll tap 3 and we'll cast a Murder to destroy the creature with flying. Then we will untap, draw for turn into an Oblivion's Hunger. This is exactly what I was kind of looking for and waiting for. So with Oblivion's Hunger, target creature we control gains indestructible until the end of turn. Which means that if somebody casts a spell like this on Mirri, we would be able to remove, essentially make Mirri indestructible. She wouldn't be able to be destroyed. So we'll get down our swamp for turn. And then what we're gonna do is pay 1, 2, 3, 4. Cast Mirri. There are no flying creatures on the board, so we can attack with Mirri right now. Deal 3 damage. So now we're at 3 commander damage. And then we can pass the turn. Let's say through all that time, our opponent did have a removal spell for them to destroy our commander. They were waiting for that. We'll pay 2, cast Oblivion's Hunger, and give Mirri indestructible, just to keep Mirri alive. Then we will untap. It now is a race. We are sprinting to see how quickly we can get to 21 points of damage. We're already at 3. So right now what we can do is pay 2. We can equip this to Mirri. So Mirri is now a 5/2. We can pay 1 and equip Cranial Plating to Mirri. And then just for safety purposes, we're going to play this Corrupt Court Official, which forces our opponent to discard another card from their hand. Now, over the course of the game, our opponents discarded 3 cards. Then we will go to combat, and we will attack with a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 damage. Here. So now our opponent is at 10 commander damage in 2 turns. So we'll pass a turn, they'll pass a turn back to us. We'll untap, we'll draw into a swamp, we'll play the swamp. Now, what we can do is pay 2, we'll get down the Army of Iroas. Now, the Army of Iroas being on the battlefield causes the cranial plating to get buffed by 1. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Mirri is 8 damage right now. So what we're actually going to do is just pay 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to cast this Demon's Due, which lets us scry 2 and then draw 2 cards. 1, 2. Scrying means, Melanie, that we get to look at the top cards of our library, and if we want them, we could either keep them or we can put them on the bottom of our library and then take 2 more cards. So it essentially just lets us choose if we're going to want to draw those cards or not. And I think right here we're going to choose to... This card destroys creatures our opponents control, and this card can buff Mirri. I want ways to protect Mirri right now, so we're actually going to put both these cards on the bottom. Then we'll draw 1, 2. So this is kind of a way to protect Mirri in a sense. This is going to force our opponent to discard another card, and then we can use Funeral Rites to draw 2 more cards, which is nice. So we're going to pay 1, we're going to cast this Divist, which is going to force our opponent to reveal their hand, and then we choose a creature or artifact and we force them to discard. Let's say that we look at their hand and they have nothing inside their hand. So we'll go to combat and we'll attack with Mirri. So now this is 8 damage that we're dealing, and now our opponent is down to 18 commander damage, which means that if we hit them for 3, then essentially they lose the game. And let's say our opponent casts a board wipe. Our board wipe is a card that essentially destroys all of the creatures on the table. So all of our creatures die, essentially. And we had no mana or cards to protect Mirri. But the reason why Mirri is so strong, for a Voltron commander, we're going to pass a turn, or they're going to pass a turn. We'll untap, we'll draw into a swamp, we'll play the swamp. The reason why Mirri is strong is because our opponent's at 18 commander damage, and we can just pay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, remembering that we have to pay 2 more because Mirri went back to the command zone. And now we tap this mana, pay 6. Mirri has flying, first strike, and more importantly, haste, which means she can attack right now. I could pay 1 just to be sure, and we'll equip Mirri with this, making Mirri a 6/2 creature. We'll attack our opponent for 6 damage. Now that is 24 commander damage, and they lose the game. And we win. So that's generally how this deck works, Melanie. It's just about forcing your opponents to discard cards so that we can discard the ones that are going to potentially remove our commander from the game, and then we draw until we draw cards that protect our commander, and then we play our cards that make our commander stronger in order for us to be able to just make Mirri more strong so we can deal more damage at a faster pace to win the game as quickly as possible. Okay? So if you're new to the channel, you're more than welcome to subscribe. Also keep in mind that there is a Discord in the channel as well, where people go into Discord and talk, and they build commander decks. Sometimes they play games of commander over there as well. We also do giveaways on the channel as well, and that's generally run through the Discord. We're also going to be doing giveaways on a Patreon where you pay $5 a month and you enter for a second giveaway every week. So essentially there would be 8 giveaways every month if you're a part of the Patreon. More news will be given for that in the future, and specifically for the people in the Discord will be alerted much sooner than everyone else. So if you want to join the Discord, you're more than welcome. Okay, so I always say the same thing. Always remember, eat healthy, work out every single day, and most importantly, you got to remember to believe in yourself. All right, peace out, people. Remember to subscribe and like the video. All right.